My name is Scott Frazier. I'm in Bridger, Montana. I'm an enrolled tribal member of the Crow Nation. I'm an old person. People keep saying I'm not, but I am, and I've seen a lot of things. But I'm an environmentalist, and um, I, I, I support the animals more than sometimes I support the human being.
Thanks, Scott. My name's Abby, and I am studying wildlife biology. I'm a teacher and a filmmaker, and I manage Animal Educate on YouTube. So I have asked to interview the lovely Scott today, just so we can get some clarity on, I guess, hunting, but hunting in relation to the Native American culture. So I'm going to fire some questions at you, Scott. Shall I
Yeah,
begin?
so for just to beginning, I don't represent all of the Native American approaches to hunting. I can only say I I can only say I know what I know from what I was taught, and it's not necessarily practiced amongst all of the tribes. So don't get mixed up that I represent all of the Indians because I don't.
No, it's just your view we're after today.
It's my personal view.
It's your personal view, yeah. I mean, first of all, it'd be good for you to talk about when hunting wildlife began.
Yeah, so my understanding, nobody alive was there when it started. Um, so we can only go off of what we're in our imagination and the stereotypes that Hollywood has given us um, about hunting. Hunting for me, when I was young, was taught to me by my father, who was taught by his father, who was so on back to the beginning. So hunting was a way that we fed our family. We didn't have lots of extra, and so all of the meat that we had in our diet was from hunting. We couldn't afford to buy beef. So hunting was something that I did with my dad. We got up early. We went to the hunting places and we got out and went hunting. My dad went hunting. I went walking in the forest. I have to say, I wasn't excited about killing an animal. It was never something I really wanted to do. It was something that I had to do as a family member to support the family. Hunting in the old days, um, it was something that fed us, it clothed us. It probably changed somewhere back in the days when they were in the cave, when it became sports hunting, when they were telling a story about the hunt, about the kill and the ferocious animal or whatever it was that they killed. Once they put that design on the cave, that hunting for sustenance became sports hunting, in my opinion. Sports hunting is just for killing and not for necessarily eating. And so I don't support sports hunting. People don't need to do that. There's and from what I understand, in a lot of the situations, the people who do sports hunting, they don't even take the meat home. So I don't support that, as well as fishing as well. I mean, fishing. People don't even think about fishing when they talk about hunting, but it is going into another world, another animal's life form's world, and taking them. So the way I was taught about this is that you have to allow, as my dad would say, you have to allow the animal to give itself to you for what you need. And you have to let that animal stop, look at you, and surrender to that moment. And at that time, it's a joining of light, of forces of light, of the deer or the elk or the animal. It joins with you in that moment. And that's why a lot of times we say our prayers over the food that we eat, is that we want to respect that life in that harvest. So the way I was taught, and the way others were taught, it's different, but it's still, when men go out with their sons, and it's a rite of passage that goes way back to the beginning when people started hunting. There was a rite of passage. The young men grew up to a point that then uncles or fathers, brothers would give them a rite of passage, and they would hunt for the food for the family. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's changed now to where it's hard to say there is a rite of passage. If there is a rite, I think one of the things that's so interesting is who gives you that authority to kill. Who told you could do that and it's okay? And that comes from the rite of passage. That comes when my father hands me the gun and tells me to go and do this. But beyond the moment of kill, there's no explanation of what happens to the rest of the animals. What happens to, for example, what happens if you shoot a wolf? If you shoot an alpha wolf, the pack breaks up. It disintegrates. It has no leader. And so you never want to shoot that one. So there were rules, that my dad gave me, which one of the animals, who could you shoot, who couldn't you shoot, what, it was all this decision and judgment on the animals, on who was going to feed me. And unfortunately, that didn't necessarily work all the time because of the action. So that's, the beginning is lost in time, but it's put on cave walls as in, sports hunting.
Okay. Do you think we need to hunt in this day and age?
We have plenty of food for everyone if everyone is allowed to eat. Unfortunately, I think what's happened is money has gotten involved, and so food costs money. Where do you get the money? You have to work, or if you don't work, you steal, or you do whatever you can, borrow, buy, whatever you can to feed yourself. And in a case where you have no money and you are destitute, then hunting would be the only way to feed yourself. And that would be necessary if you're in a survival situation. But I noticed in these grocery stores, there's a lot of food being thrown away. And we don't have to eat just meat. We can eat other things to survive. So in many cases, hunting is for the wealthy. And the poor people, they can't afford licenses, they can't afford the gun, they can't afford the ammunition. So the people who need the food aren't doing the hunting. And I don't think we need to do hunting for, the elite. I don't think we need to have wildlife and protect wildlife just so that they can kill them.
Yeah, there's lots of different types of hunters, isn't there? And I guess what we're talking about is very broad, isn't it? Because you could focus on hunting, well, sports or trophy hunting, as you've already touched upon. You could talk about hunting for conservation purposes, and you could talk about, well, there's loads, isn't there? That's the thing.
That's right. There's a lot of different avenues that people use to kill. Mm-hmm. Excuses for them to hunt.
Yeah.
And and they're really they're excuses. The problem, as I see it, is that taking a life. There's a responsibility of taking a life, and if you celebrate for taking the life, that to me is a mistake. This is a terrible moment for a family of animals that they lose one of their members. Maybe it's a doe or a male or a female or whatever the case may be. They were a tight knit family, and all of a sudden one is gone, and it will affect them. Uh, in my experience, now clearly, I want to say I quit hunting about 40 years ago, and it was one of the better moves that I made. I was glad that I quit hunting. Now I go out and I take a photograph. I'm still hunting. I'm still using the skills my father taught me, but I'm just not using that final one where you're killing. A photograph has a lot longer life than a dead animal.
But
So
when did you choose? What was there a moment where you suddenly just decided no more hunting?
yeah, that was a great moment because I had been going, I had been lecturing in Independence, Missouri, and I was at one of the little schools. I'm sure you a big school, but it was third grade, probably 8 or 9 year olds. And on my way, I had noticed, looking out the window, I had noticed a herd of wild turkeys, and then I saw some deer, and I knew that they had been trying to reintroduce all these animals back into that state. And so when I went to the school, I said, "Man, you are so lucky as young kids to see wild deer and wild turkeys." And I was so excited about telling them about what I saw. And then one of the little girls, leave it to a kid, raised their hand and they said, "Do you hunt and kill animals?" And I said, "Not anymore." I quit right there on that, in front of those kids. I quit hunting. Um,
Amazing.
I I just didn't see the point in it because there was so much food in the store. I just couldn't see the point of going out. I didn't need the food. I had money.
Yeah. And I guess there was that sort of uh, conflict or contradiction where you saw these animals and you were sort of gushing over them, really, and sort of you were so excited about seeing them, as you said, and you were almost, stating, "Wow, kids, you're so lucky you get to see these animals, and if you hunt them, you don't necessarily get to see them as much, or you're hurting something that you should cherish, really." So that little girl probably just exposed that in that moment, didn't she, by asking you, which is amazing. And you know what? There's many very well known hunters that they were known for hunting. So great hunters that were or had an experience like that, like Aldo Leopold, for example, where he was hired to kill a wolf called Lobo, and he finally outsmarted Lobo. No one else could, and killed him. But he sort of made eye contact with him, and he watched him die. And in that moment, everything changed for him, and he became an advocate for wolves. And he's actually known as the grandfather of ecology or conservation. So, and this is someone who, as I said, was a great hunter. This is someone that hunted for a living. This is someone that had that perception of animals, that attitude towards animals, and then in just one split moment, everything changed for him because he made a connection. He had an epiphany. And I think when we talk about people changing, yes, I think we have to, in some regards, we have to, well, most regards we have to rely on generational change, but in some situations someone can change. You can, by experiencing or like having an experience with the animal or learning something new. So that's why I think you'd probably agree education is one of the most important things in order to eliminate hunting.
Yeah, the education, there's a lot of reasons not to hunt. And one, of course, is to preserve the wildlife we have left. Now, you have to remember, if you don't, it's okay, but in our country, um, when the pioneers came out, all they had to eat was wildlife. And by about 1910, there was very little wildlife here. They had basically killed everything.
Mm.
And uh, the ranching community was good. They were supportive of that because then they could sell cattle. You see, it was forcing the individuals here in this country to now buy beef, buy food instead of going hunting. So there was a transition there, and thus was formed the Fish and Wildlife and the different groups of government um, programs to protect the wildlife. And so a lot of the wildlife you see here in Montana, those are actually reintroduced animals, as well as the ones I was talking about when I saw those children in school. These are reintroduced over 100 years nearly of wildlife management. And so it's already been proven that if you just let people go and kill, they will kill it all. They'll kill everything for some reason. But the wildlife organizations, they've protected wildlife, and they need to continue to protect them because people tend to they get out of control sometimes during hunting season. Um, the other point I want to make too is when you go walking in the forest with a camera, um, you're just one of the animals in the forest. When you're walking in the forest with a gun, you are a superior animal, and the animals have no chance to avoid being detected because of that superior thought in your mind. You're going to go and roust out every animal you can to shoot. And so you have dogs, you have different people going and, stirring up the animals to shoot them. And it's quite unfortunate because we have lost what is called in the terms of hunting, we've lost what's called fair chase, which means that give the animal an opportunity to get away. Whereas now we have all of the different tools that hunters use, whether it's technology or it's transportation or it's the weapons they're using. They've lost the idea of fair chase. There is no fair chase. The animals are at a disadvantage. And with that in mind, some individuals have gone to try to go back to, bow and arrow, atlatl, going back to primitive type things. But then the gun people say, well, then that animal will suffer, and it's not a proper way to, dispatch this animal. And so the terms they use and the things that they, as in the government, the things that they use to try to defend hunting are becoming very, very limited. Hunting isn't necessary.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of arguments, obviously, for hunting. There's a lot against, and yeah, I've that one comes up a lot. So if the hunter's using particular weaponry like an arrow, then that animal could potentially suffer greatly. But actually, I've looked at some statistics, and I don't know them off by heart, obviously, and it's actually a lot greater, even whether they're using a gun, whatever weapon they're using. Yes, they will suffer more with arrows and older tools that they used to use for hunting, but even with current practices, animals aren't necessarily always killed straight away. You're always going to have amateur hunters. You're always going to have people that make mistakes. So there is actually, statistically speaking, lots of animals that do suffer and don't actually die straight away. And it's so that can't really be an argument. And yeah, like I said, there's many sort of arguments against hunt. What I hear all the time is we need to hunt for conservation purposes because animals are overpopulated. And yes, we all know what happens when we have an overpopulated species. That animal's going to suffer anyway, human beings will suffer, the environment will suffer. It's just a knock-on effect in the food chain, isn't it? And we know that, and we know that we have to manage those populations, and lethal management is the go-to because it's meant to be cheaper and the easier option. But actually, if you look at the reasons why these animals are overpopulated, it's again a human problem. We've caused that. We are creating that problem. We're perpetuating that problem because we're not going to the core of what the issue is. I mean, in the US alone, if you look at agriculture, that's probably the most but that's the biggest issue because you're taking you're taking away the habitats of so many animals. Predators are obviously diminishing, so you're going to have more problems with overpopulation. I mean, look at the UK. Look at us with deer. Look at us with sheep. Absolutely destroying our environment, and we know this. We've known this for a long time because we don't have any predators here in the UK. So it's we have to play predator. The human has to come along and play the apex predator, and we don't do it properly, and we're not that because we're not supposed to. That's my opinion anyway. So okay, so if we're saying hunting isn't necessary, we've got to be able to look at what about the issues that we have without the hunting. And I just think there's not enough work being done in that area. So if you look at other ways of preventing overpopulation, there's loads and there's dozens of studies out there, but it's just not being done quick enough. There's lots of things that we can do in order to prevent it. There's a lot of things that have been done and that could be done and that aren't being done quick enough. And what's frustrating is going back to something you brought up earlier, people will make excuses to kill. So this is coming up over and over again. Yes, but conservation. Yes, but and we know that actually it's probably not necessary, especially in this day and age. So that's my main sort of area of frustration, knowing that there's so much that we can do to prevent the issues that hunting supposedly resolves. There's so much that we can do without necessarily harming the animal, and we owe them that because let's face it, it's a human, as I said, problem. We started it. It's our issue to solve. Why is it the animal has to suffer no matter what? That's my question. That's my argument. The animal always has to suffer, and us human beings, we just don't seem to be able to put our sort of bloodthirst to one side to look at something, or well, to be more ethical, to empathise more with the animal, to look at the bigger picture, to look at wildlife as a whole, to look at the environment as a whole, and look at what's better. Rewilding, for example, there's just so much that we can do in order to balance the ecosystem, to balance the environment, should I say. And yeah, we're just not doing it. And I think it's because hunting is just so deeply embedded within people's psyches. and it's going to be very difficult and require generational change, which I think is happening very, very slowly. Instead of these kind of, like you're kind of unique. You had a realization, or you had an experience where you just said, right, okay, yeah, I'm not going to hunt anymore. I think that's quite rare. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but I'll never understand the bloodthirst. I just don't understand how, because I've looked into it, and I've looked into people, well, hunters, and how much they enjoy the kill. They go into what they call a frenzy, and they kind of get off on it, and they enjoy it. I don't know, as much as, well, whatever they.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and it's the saddest part is that it's their entertainment, and they're entertained. There's probably less than 1% of the population that actually hunts, and there's probably a small percentage that it's entertainment, and it's entertainment for the wealthy, because of politics. Some of our laws that have been put in place were put in place 20 years ago, and they're not changing because those people that push those laws, they are still in political power. They're still sitting in the position to make judgment over these animals, and they need to go. We need to get younger people who have that are current with environmental issues and wildlife issues, instead of these old people who are just doing the same old thing that was done before them on how they're managing these animals. And they should quit thinking that they even manage the animals. That the animals' last freedom is to be able to go where they want. So, the politics behind hunting, which is for the native people, we never even think about that. We just go out. We go out with our family. We go out with our relatives or our father. We go hunting. It's a moment where fathers teach sons about being a man, and if killing is part of that, we need to get rid of that because there's too many people. So, as a cultural person, some of the ways that we hunted, looking at a hunter, there was the murderer, there was the harvester, and there was the assassin. The harvester is the one that goes, says his prayers, goes to the hunt, lets the deer or the elk or what the animals see them, give that moment of surrender, then go and connect with it after the shot was shot. Go connect with that animal and respect it for its life. That's the harvester. Then the murderer, they see animals running around, they jump out of their car and they just start shooting. And they may shoot 3 or 4, and may only take one, or that's the best part. That's a murderer. And then there was the guy who stood up in a tree, hidden in a tree, and the deer or the elk or the animals walking along, and then they shoot that animal. That's an assassin. Somebody who doesn't even, have the courage to show themselves to the animal. That moment of adrenaline when the animal, like a bear, a cougar, or a wolf, something that has teeth that will actually, a buffalo, for example, something that will actually come and confront you. The people who hunt them are so far away. There's no way that animal has any chance of getting away. The hunter just begins to shoot until he connects. And it's not hunting. That's murder. It's murder or assassination. So when we start to realize we are not the center of the universe, when we as human beings began to see ourselves as part of the animal structure of this planet instead of apart from it, when we began to understand our purpose, then everything will start to flow better once we start to awaken to our purpose on this planet. But right now, our purpose is that we dominate. We are the animals are inferior to us, and we can do whatever we want. When we quit thinking like that, we will be better with the wildlife and better with our planet. Culturally, the stereotypes from Hollywood, culturally, it's hard to find normal anymore because of the stereotypes of how native people hunted, whether it was a fish weir or a buffalo jump or different ways of harvesting. In the old time, there was an individual that came in and prayed over this because it was going to be death involved. There was going to be tragedy. A buffalo jump is nothing but tragedy. Once we as individuals on the planet realize what we're doing to our planet, we will be better off, as well as the planet, as well as the animals. The animals have a purpose. They, like you've also said to me, is that the animals want to live. They want to have a life. So, give it to them, and then don't destroy it with a gun.
Yeah. I know a lot of people say to me, especially because I don't eat animals either, and I get a lot of people that say to me, well, what would happen then if everyone stopped eating animals, if everyone, what those animals wouldn't exist anymore. But I find it such a bizarre thing because it's almost like people make out that the animals, they want to be born into a life of suffering, and it wouldn't be fair because then people like me deprive them of that because I don't eat them. And I think it's kind of the same with hunting. People just kind of view those animals, they're there for us. Like you said, we view ourselves as superior beings, and we put ourselves as that sort of apex predator on top of that triangle, that pyramid, instead of in the center of or not the center, but within that world, the animal world. We are part of it. We're not outside of that. We're part of it. And yeah, I don't understand. It's almost like, yes, we've evolved, technically speaking. Yes, we've made lots of advancements, and we can say that we are superior in some ways, if you wanted to call it that, because we've had the abilities to create particular tools, because we've been able to put certain practices in place which makes it more efficient and what have you. But the question is always, or the statement to make rather, the animal always wants to live. It doesn't matter what we're using. It doesn't matter what tools we're using. It doesn't matter how long it takes them to die. Yes, it's more ethical, obviously, if they die quicker. But at the end of the day, no matter what happens, that animal still wants to live. So even if you kill them quickly and ethically, it doesn't really matter what you're doing with the animal after, whether you waste the animal or not. That animal's gone. It's and it didn't get to live out its life. It didn't, and it's just a tragedy that there's just so many people that have the opinion that the animals are there for us and not to be part of this world like we are.
Yeah, that's a really tough hill to climb. Why do we have to kill them? Why do we have to do that? We don't have to kill them. Is the matter now? What society has done is created an avenue for people to have entertainment and joy by killing. and that's sports hunting at its best. And those individuals, what they want is control. They want superiority. They want to dominate. And we're running out of space now. Here in our country, one of our problems is that we had so much abundance that the mindset of the hunter is, oh well, there's others, there's more. I can take two or three. There's plenty. They can go out and make more. That's their mindset. Unfortunately, that mindset has a lot of fallacies in it, because that herd of deer could get a wasting disease and be wiped out, and you have no deer. So we don't know what the future holds. I'm not. I think what's going to happen in our country is that people are going to come to this moment where they're going to say enough is enough with this gun idea and hunting. An excuse to kill is no good anymore here. I think we're going to see some changes in the next 20 or 30 years, but unfortunately, the people's growth and the wildlife's habitat, there is no wilderness now. People are climbing all over the mountains, and with that said, there's really no time for animals just to have peace and quiet. Without us bumping around in the forest with our motorcycles or our ATVs or our guns. It's noisy in the forest. Whereas when I was young, you could go out hunting, you'd see nobody. A deer would maybe show up, and you'd have to harvest that. And then, of course, from then on, the fun is over, because now you have work to do. You've got butchering and all of those techniques and skills that were taught to me by my father. I don't see any point in teaching anybody them, because all of our meats and things are already processed. So to me, hunting has really become something that's for the wealthy. It's like Yellowstone Park. Everybody, looks at Yellowstone Park. Yeah, it was really a great environmental to put aside land for habitat and blah blah blah. But actually, the real reason Yellowstone Park was designed was so that the rich people could come out and shoot buffalo and elk and deer, and by 1906. There were only 20 buffalo left in Yellowstone Park. They had shot them all. So when they finally put into protecting those animals, the biggest problem they had in Yellowstone Park was poaching, people going in and shooting their animals. That was their biggest problem. And so they put the military in there to protect the animals. So even in your best environmental, design, like Yellowstone Park, putting aside land and for habitat, individuals still can't stop themselves from going in and taking advantage of that abundance.
Yeah, haven't you lost like a third of your Yellowstone wolves since the laws changed?
What's that again?
Haven't you lost a third of your Yellowstone wolves recently, since the laws changed?
So we have now a different administration than we had. We had a more environmentally sound administration. This administration that we have now in Montana is pro-killing. The governor had somebody trap a wolf. He then drove down to where that wolf was trapped and shot it. Now, there is no fair chase in shooting a trapped animal. He did the same later with a cougar, a mountain lion. Somebody took dogs and treed that animal. Called the governor. Governor drove 2 hours, from what I understand, to shoot that cougar that was treed. Now that's not fair chase. that's not hunting. But when your top politician for your state behaves like that, why should anybody else follow any other rule?
Yeah.
So, it's sending a really poor message. And he was elected on what he claimed to be a hunter. Oh, his tactics are far from hunting. So all we can do now is, to get him out of that office, vote him out, and get somebody in there that is more environmentally driven. But because we have to think of the future, we can't just think of what we are right now. We have to think of the future. If we want to have animals, we've got to take care of them.
I remember you said to me, Scott, when I first met you, it just stuck with me. You said it was something about, I included it in Wolves Unmasked, the film. You said, when a butterfly flaps its wings, it impacts everything. So what do you think shooting a bear or a wolf does? What kind of impact does that have? And so when you look at those two actions or events, and you look at the energy of both of them and the ripple effect of both of them, everything's connected. And no one sits around thinking about this, do they? No one's going to sit around and think about that. But actually, when you do and you consider that, it's astounding. And if we were all to think that way and have that awareness, then the world would be a much better place, wouldn't it? It's like
Right.
with wolves. It's like you said earlier, when you shoot a wolf, I think you said an alpha wolf, you're completely destroying the pack. And yeah, you're right. So what's going to happen? So when they use lethal management on wolves, it doesn't work, because all they're doing is they're taking out that troublesome wolf, let's say, which a lot of the time they're not troublesome, and then the pack will break apart, they'll disperse, it will become very unstable. So then what happens? They don't have the power of the pack, they don't have the collaborative nature of hunting. So of course they're going to start going through bins of course they're going to start to take the livestock, the domestic animals, let's say. Of course they're going to do that, because they're not going to be there's no strength anymore, a wolf that's sort of dispersed, or let's say a lone wolf, they have to take out much less powerful prey, because they just don't have the pack there to back them up. So you're obviously going to have more issues from that, aren't you? So they think they're taking out the wolf and solving the problem, but actually they're just creating more problems, even bigger problems than they had in the first place, because they don't just have one troublesome wolf anymore, they have 5 or 6 troublesome wolves.
Yeah, it's amazing how little science know about animals.
Yeah.
It's this old story about the mice in the field, in the farmer's field. And the farmer says, "I've got a lot of mice in my field mice in my field, and what do I do about it?" Well, they go and poison it. Well, if they poison it, that happens to be the ones that get away, they happen to rebreed until they reproduce to the point where they were. So, the natural effect is that when you have a large amount of animals, the environment will take care of that, because they'll eat all the food, or they'll outlive their environmental space, and some will leave and some will die, but the place will reduce. So even a farmer, he's been on that farm for years and years, his generations and generations, he still doesn't understand how that pulse of the animals works in his field. He still doesn't understand that if you remove them, more will just come back. You got to let nature take its course, and they don't want to do it because they're losing money, and money's down to the, what is walking in the forest with a gun to kill a bear? What is it worth? And people have put a price on that. And so I'm discouraged about how wildlife is being treated, because I believe the hunters no longer have that honor of hunting. They're no longer an honorable hunter. Um, but I may be wrong. I may be wrong. There may be people out hunting and they're doing the old practices and they're doing all of the things that their ancestors taught them, right back to the beginning, but uh, giving somebody a gun and setting them out in the forest to kill is a mistake. And they don't need to do that anymore. Personally, I think the noise of guns going off in the hunting season is very disturbing, and it's disappointing. I don't believe the animals actually have a day off anymore. I think people are out walking around, pushing them, or coming into their environment. Like today, for example, it'll be over 30 Celsius here, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Those animals are looking for shade. Now, if I'm up walking around and I kick them out of that shade, they're going to be in the sunlight the rest of the day, suffering. So I've created that problem just by walking around in the forest on a hot day. So, we have to take responsibility for these animals because they can't vote and they don't have any money. So we need to take responsibility. People need to step up and quit, hunting. They need, if they want to hunt with all the tactics and techniques that they have, they need to take a camera, because I think people enjoy seeing some of the photographs rather than a head on your wall.
Yeah.
It's
Very
so
bizarre.
gruesome. We're still kind of primal,
Seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You've answered pretty much all the questions that I had.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you. That was really interesting. And we could,
Okay.
the thing is, we could talk for hours about this, couldn't we? That's the thing. It could.
Oh,
There's just so much.
you and I are gonna talk weeks about this.